Hello, everybody.
Hey, everybody. We are back again. It is the last Wednesday of the month, which means it is time again for another installment of the Black is Brilliant speaker series in partnership with our dear friends at Black Education from New Orleans and provided through the support of the Institute of Mental Hygiene. Shout out to our dear brother, Ron McLean, the executive director, and all of his team for believing in this work enough to support it more than once. And so we're excited to be back here. Before we go any further, let me bring in.
I would say before we even bring them in, if you missed any of the previous installment of the Black is Brilliant Community Power Study series, please make sure you check it out. We had an extraordinary conversation with Dr. Akosua Lassane and Dr. Vera Triplet, who, I mean, it was an extraordinary conversation. I was actually talking about the concept of the warm demander today. So if you're interested in learning about what that means, please make sure you check out that video. It is on the BNOLA YouTube channel, just like this one will be.
And I just realized we did not introduce ourselves. I'm Blair Dotton Haley.
I'm Brandon Dotton Haley, and we are collectively known as the Blairisms.
And we are excited to be here to be your moderators for this conversation. Without further ado, I'm going to bring in the fearless leader, one of the fearless leaders of Black Education from New Orleans, our dear sister, the executive director, Adrenda Kelly. Come on, Dren.
Hey, y'all. It's so good to see y'all. Very, very excited to be here to continue our speaker series. Can you believe we are in season 2? Amazing.
Woo! I love it.
Amazing.
What a blessing.
But to your point, you know, I'm Adrenda Kelly, and I am on behalf of the team at BNOLA, just really excited for this conversation, which does continue, right? Conversations that we started last year, where we focus in on trying to learn about the Black education history in New Orleans in order to derive, right, lessons, strategies, ideas to meet the challenges of today. And so that's what this is really about. And it's an example of, you know, what we do best as an organization. You know, for those who are new to BNOLA, we are every day, all day, thinking about ways to build the education ecosystem in ways that ignite the Black brilliance that exists in our schools and communities. And so this speaker series is a part of that effort. And as I said, it's this space where we get to have some intentional study of, you know, what quality Black education has been and continues to be in our community. And so today's conversation, we're continuing like our journey through the 5 Black education pillars. And we'll focus on rigorous sight in the Black teaching tradition tonight. We have some amazing speakers with us tonight, Dr. Kamika Royal, Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry. They're going to share their insights and expertise. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our co-leader and chief of programs to introduce our amazing speakers so we can get started.
Hi, everybody. I am here to show deep, deep love to both of these Black scholars who are also people that we love so much as an organization. Dr. Kamika Royal is an associate professor and program director of urban educational leadership at Morgan State University. Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry is 504 all day, an alum of Edna Carr, and also the Associate Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But I wanted, those are the headlines about them. But what I want to say is that Dr. Kamika Royal, Kamika as I call her, but put the respect to her name tonight, is Dr. Royal, is one of my best sister friends, but also a longtime mentor of mine in education. She is someone that as a Black educator taught me that you always speak the truth, that you are always teaching with our students and their communities at the forefront of our work. And I love her so, so deep. Dr. Henry is a brilliant scholar and was actually one of the first scholars we engaged with as an organization at BNOLA. He is someone that has studied deeply the landscape of New Orleans, especially post-Katrina, New Orleans and the situation in which we find ourselves with our communities. And so love him as well. So excited that they are here to talk to each other. They love and respect each other as well, which makes it even better. So they're just going to have a raw, honest conversation about rigorous sight, about what our children need to know and understand. And I think that at this time in America, all of our Black history and all the things that we've built are under attack. I could not think of more brilliant Black scholars and educators and lovers of us as a people to hear from. So I'm so excited to have both of them here tonight.
Could not have said that better ourselves. Thank you so much for that exceptional introduction to these wonderful academics who we're about to engage with. Now we will go ahead and let y'all enjoy this conversation from the background and maybe a little bit later. See you very soon. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Kamika Royal and Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr. to the Black is Brilliant Community Power Study Series, y'all.
Hello, family. How are you?
Hello. Thank y'all for the opportunity.
Oh, this is our pleasure.
We are so glad to have you all here. And before we jump in, I do want to just give us what Binola has defined as rigorous sight before we get started. Rigorous sight, a concept promoting a deep critical understanding of Black life and history, encouraging students to study the social, political realities affecting Black people and to recognize and challenge systems of oppression. Woo!
Ain't that a word?
I have to say, and before I go to the good doctors to jump right on in, this made me immediately, as I read this, think about an experience I had in higher education when I was in a Black politics class, and I was told by the professor that I was too interested in Black history. And this was a Black politics class. And I kept talking about Black history. And I said, well, if we're not talking about Black history, how are we understanding Black politics? And so this idea of rigorous sight that frames the education of young Black people with the lens or with the sight to understand how they need to use that education to challenge the systems that have oppressed Black people around them is a huge nuance that I think I went to an HBCU and I had a Black PhD tell me that I was too interested in Black history in a Black politics class. So rigorous sight is necessary and important.
So what you're saying is that that professor wasn't very well visioned or sighted at all.
Clearly.
Got it.
But talk to us, and I'll let you all decide how.
Ladies first.
Well, yes. But talk to us about what you think of when you hear the words rigorous sight and that definition.
Well, I could start there, but I just want to sort of speak to this overlap between politics and history, right? I think sometimes we are so siloed, and a lot of it is due to our training. You know, we are, in a lot of ways, some of us are taught, depending on who your instructors are, to sort of, this is our discipline, this is our area, this is what we're focused on. But from my own work, from the work I've done since I have been an academic, it's impossible to understand the current if we don't take the time to understand how our past created our current reality. And we can't talk about planning for future if we don't consider what we've done, to consider how it was done, where missteps might have been, so that we can reassess how we go forward. And so I think the best teachers allow for that overlap. They encourage this interdisciplinary sort of approach and questioning. And I think that's who we are, as a people.
Absolutely.
Dr. Henry?
Yeah, well, first off, again, thank you all. And it's so much to be in community with you all. Kamika, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you in that beard. Yes, go ahead. I love it.
We approve.
Yes, honey, I'm from Philly. Okay.
Well, it's more here and less here. So that's what happens as you get older.
It's life, but it's looking good on you, sir.
Thank you. So I'm here for
what we got.
There's
Stay out of that part of this conversation.
I know, right? All right. You know, look, we have to affirm ourselves.
I love Dr. Henry, and I haven't seen him for a while, so you just gotta let us love on each other a little bit.
I love that.
But what I want to say is, I just want to say two things. One, I think Kamika, Dr. Royal's point is just so central, right? To thinking about how, first off, we can't have a conversation about politics without understanding the role that history has played, right? So I'm not going to add to that, but I will say part of what we're in this moment, as we see the gutting of, for instance, NSF and other institutions, is that we actually need people who understand politics, who understand history, who understand culture, who understand society, right? We just can't stem our way through it. We just can't stance our way through this thing, right? And so part of, I think, the challenge that we're under is that what history does, what understandings of sociology or politics help us to understand, or how power is operating. But I think also, as I was thinking about the title of tonight's session, I have three kind of little points that I want to add to that. I'm not trying to proselytize, but if you feel like you get saved in the midst, then, you know, pass the plate. But say things. One, from the good old book, we got study to show thyself approved. Right? The importance of study becomes critical to this work, right? We just can't be moving through this world unstudied, unhinged, not noticing and understanding the trends and the ways that our lives are shaped by the powers that be. So we have to actually do the studying work. The other thing I was going to say is that where there is no vision, perish. So as I was thinking about the idea of sight, right, and sight, vision, perception, all of that becomes so central, right? And I think it's critical. In this moment, the whole goal has been to miseducate, right? Has been to disconnect, to leave us feeling, you know, as Du Bois says, torn asunder. So for me, you know, I can't remove the idea of study and vision and sight as it's linked intimately to the lives of Black people, but more precisely linked to our survival and survival throughout this thing. We have to have those, and anyone that says that we can't or shouldn't is actually not committed to Black life.
Yeah, pass the plate.
No,
go ahead, pass the plate.
There's a whole word right
pass
there.
The plate.
You know, I think as we're thinking about the time that we're in now, right, and how important it is to be engaged and, to your point, aware of what is actually going on. I'm curious from your perspectives, and I'll start with you, Dr. Henry. What is if you had to pick, what would you say is the most pressing or important issue that Blacks, or I would say lesson, that's a better word, that Black students need to learn about in order to make themselves a force to be reckoned with as they are challenging these systems of oppression?
Oh, that's a really good question. I often say this, and I think this imagery is really important. Our enslaved ancestors that were in the hold of the slave ship, in the midst of those dire circumstances, being chained and coffled and shackled together, still survived, still lived, still pushed and created, and loved and did all of that. So, you know, I mean, we can talk about like what's 10 strategies somebody might want to apply and this, that, and the other, but I don't want the young people and the old people and everybody in between to forget that that there is a future, right? In it, right? And that requires that we do have the wherewithal, the skill, the knowledge to push forward and keep going, but to understand that the conservatives and those that are not supporting of Black life, they don't control the future, and they do not have, inevitability is not theirs. They don't define that. And so for me, the real lesson when I think about Black life, Black study, Black struggle, is that we keep going in the midst, right? We persist and create and build despite all of that which is surrounding us, right? And for me, that's the thing to remember. We could talk about strategy. We could talk about what books you need to read, da, 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 da. But I think in some ways for some of the young people today, this moment that we're in is really, really new, right? Tina Marie said, we've been here before, deja vu, right? But
favorites.
Not that I'm citing Tina Marie, but we've been here. This is not new. This is a new iteration.
Yeah.
So I feel like for the young people, this might be like, oh my God, what is happening? I don't know what the hell's happening here. But to know that even in the midst of all those dire struggles that we were in, that there's always life, there's always love, there's always community, and there's always resistance.
Yes. Yes. Dr. Royal, please.
I would add on to that to not consent in advance.
Ooh. Wait, you can't be
Part of what pains me right now, as all these executive orders come out, and is people acting like these things are already law, like it's already done, right? And I would say that we need courage more than anything to say actually no, right? Even to the extent that we don't believe in the process of justice and litigation in this country, to not consent in advance. An executive order is not law. And so we have to remember that there is a process, and these people must go through the process they have implemented. We have to hold on to the fact that, just like what Dr. Henry was saying, that those before us, they did so much more with so much less, right? There are those of us, I remember the Republican Revolution of 94, right? I remember when Bill Clinton was trying to out-Republican the Republicans. This moment, and I know those who came before me remember, what Nixon was doing, right? We remember what was happening prior to that. So it's very important that we know that this is a moment in time that does not define our forever, that we not consent in advance. And I'm really encouraged because the young people are always the way.
Yes.
Anytime I see those of us who may be tired, who may be, when I think about the people who even, put this current regime in office because they wanted cheaper groceries and now eggs are $15, right?
Well, they didn't want
right? Even I get that. And I think that comes from an exhaustion of people's real material everyday conditions, which is why the young people become the way forward. Because the young people are the ones who are asking more questions and pushing more boundaries. And I would encourage them to read, to study, to learn from those who've gone before them and who've gone before us, but to not consent in advance and to keep pushing those boundaries.
Absolutely. 100%.
I think we brought this this concept of studying up quite a bit this evening, and you two are both surrounded by extraordinary libraries that I must say that I love to see a good library. It's so beautiful. I'm curious from your perspective, or at least from your experience in your own education, what are some of the resources that you found most helpful to understanding your role in the Black teaching tradition, or the importance of carrying forward the Black teaching tradition? Dr.
The best resources for me have been my elders. The book that I wrote came from me being a doctoral student at Temple University and getting an assignment in a class that said, we're going to go down to the archives and we're going to look at this particular aspect of Philadelphia school history, right? And I'm sitting there like, but I'm home. And I know some people who were teachers, they had to, where were they in this? And so I start calling my elders from the church I grew up in. I'm like, have you ever heard of the voluntary transfer program of 1964? And they're like, of course I did. So-and-so participated. So-and-so did this. So-and-so did that. The best resource I've had is sitting and talking to my elders. And it's something I started doing as a very young person, just listening to their stories. And while every single story won't be in alignment with what you're trying to do, in between them, you'll find your way. You just have to keep paying attention and adding a little bit of reading and adding a little bit of living to what they're telling you. And that's how you find your way.
I'm just going to piggyback on that. I'm elders, right? Like as a child, are y'all good? Y'all can hear us?
Yeah, I'm not
we
sure.
can. Our signal
sure
is going a little wonky. Are y'all good? Can y'all hear yourselves? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good.
I'm good.
Okay. Kamika, you there?
I'm good.
Kamika froze, I think. Well, let's see. Is the stream happening?
I can hear you.
On the stream?
I can hear you, Kevin.
Okay.
All right.
Kamika, you there?
I'm here.
Okay. She says, Drenda says we're good.
Oh, Drenda can see us, so she says she's watching. Okay.
Yeah. So I was just agreeing with Kamika. You know, people thought I was a weird child, and I probably was, and I'm okay with that. When I was growing up, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother, and she used to live, y'all might know, like a block away from St. Aug, right on Havana and Dulles, right off of AP2.
Exactly. I went to St. Aug, so
okay, so you know, all right. And so her and her friends would sit on their porch, and they would, you know, they have a little drink, they'll smoke, there'll be cigarettes. They wasn't into the herbal essence, but nevertheless, you know, they would be out there discussing life and the way that they saw life. And I was fascinated because they would, you know, they watch the 5 o'clock news and then sit out on the porch and talk. And what I thought was so interesting is that what was being said on the news and how they interpreted it as it was totally different, right? And so the reasoning and the rationale, the way that they made sense of the world was really fascinating to me. And so I always felt like I was sitting at the feet of elders all the time. And I, you know, I even had my own little news station, WKLH and stuff. I walk around interviewing people. They probably like, get the hell out of my way. But nevertheless, it was that engagement with them and to actually listen to what they were saying. And what I realized is that they were offering, they had a level of interpretive authority, shall we call it. The way that they saw the world, the way that they made sense of the world. I just finished teaching when I finished teaching, they're actually watching, but teaching my critical race theory class. And we covered the idea of counter narrative or counter story. And what they did was essentially deflate and debunk and puncture the dominant narrative of the world that said that they were lazy, that said that I didn't deserve, that said that the community from which I hailed was worthless, right? So like they were able to see the world, thinking about sight through their eyes. But for me, listening to them was just as much of an education as reading all the damn books behind me, right? And so, I mean, there's both, right? I think there is the kind of traditional academic study. And for me, that's Carter G. Woodson, 1933, Miseducation of the Negro. That book changed my life, right? And also it was that the people that I was in community with, the elders that supported me, that prayed for me, that, you know, put up money for me to get to school, right? Those people were central to my understanding of education, of society, and very specifically post-Katrina education. I have a former teacher, Miss Constance Surratt. After Katrina hit, my family couldn't move back, but she accepted me into her house. I lived with her so I could finish my senior year, right? That's the type of Black love, the elder love, the support that you know, Katrina thought it was undoing, but actually solidified for me. You know, elders are so central to this work, but ultimately so central to the tradition from which I think all of us on this call and many of those that are watching come from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I couldn't help but think of my grandmother, Aretha Castle Haley, said that without reforms in education, we are an obsolete people. What reforms? Because you know, another thing she said we're having the same conversation in 1984 as we're having in 1904. What are some of the reforms that you all see, especially as academics, that are necessary in order to even engage this idea of rigorous sight in education for Black children?
You know, I've seen you talk about your grandmother quite a bit as an activist.
I do. I talk,
you know, for Black folks, and you know, I adored my grandmother, so I understand. You know, I'm sure she was quite correct that what we were talking about in 84 is what was going on in 04. Because I think about Asa Hilliard and Barbara Sizemore's report from the early 80s around saving the Black child, right? For me, the question isn't about the reforms themselves, but it's more about to whom do they apply? Because there's been a lot of reform that has allegedly happened over and over again, but generally that reform happens on our backs and at our expense. So the reform that, and I'm sure Dr. Henry would agree with me, the reforms that both of us would like to see are those that actually center and advance Black people, Black communities, right? As opposed to deciding to sorting and stratifying us to decide what we don't deserve to have access to. I think about a place like the Center for Black Educator Development out of Philadelphia. They do the Black Male Educator Convening every year. The founder and director of that, Sharif El-Mekki, Sharif is a friend, and there are some things with which we do not agree. But what I always love about him is that I know 100% that he loves Black people, and the work he does on behalf of Black children is to advance Black children. And so there's a lot of conversation that he initiates around the presence of Black educators in our schools, right? That's the type of reform I'm looking for. Why are we reforming our system so much that Black educators are being pushed out of the system, and we continue to tell us that we're not worthy of teaching our own children, right? As if we haven't seen this with the indigenous boarding schools, where we decided that indigenous families should not have access to their own children, right? And now here we are in 2025, still trying to get Black educators to get access to Black children, right? When I was researching Philadelphia in 2009, what I found was there were more Black teachers in the school district of Philadelphia in 1964 than there were in 2009. So when I think about reforms, I think about the reforms we've seen in testing of our educators, but we haven't yielded greater results to students. And what we have yielded is fewer Black educators. And now generations of Black children who don't really see teaching as a viable path for them. You understand? So we have to make sure our reforms are centering those of us who need and deserve. And when I say deserve, it's because I'm saying we built this country. There's nothing in this country we shouldn't have access to. This country owes a massive debt to us. And so we absolutely deserve to have access to every iota of it that we want to.
Word.
Amen.
Amen. Pass the plate again.
So everything Dr. Royal said, right? What I would say in terms of our reforms, so I'm always, I think I agree with your grandmother, right? That reform is central. And I think to Dr. Royal's point, to what extent, under what conditions, and for whom, right?
And let me just add to that, because it may not be known that she said this at the same time that she was opening an institution for the education of young Black children, centered around young Black children, a preschool to educate, inspire, uplift young Black. That actually
we actually did a whole episode on the learning workshop in our first season. Again, if you missed anything from the first season or previous episodes of the Black is Brilliant Community Power Study series or the Black is Brilliant Speaker series, please check them out on the BNOLA YouTube.
Come on. I think that's actually a good point, right? Because I think that speaks to, the fact that your grandmother built a space, right? That there was an actual what people call independent Black institution that existed, that was actually kind of outside of the scope and purview of those that, to Dr. Royal's point, that see ill towards us, or that are actually interested in removing our stories, our narratives, and our existence from this space, or who see it as possible only as much as it is to use us for their benefit. So New Orleans is a beautiful example of Black people creating and trying to create in the midst, and also a horrifying example of when reform goes wrong. And I think New Orleans, Dr. Roy and I have connections because New Orleans and Philly and Chicago, Detroit, DC, Baltimore, Haiti, all these places have all these connections around the reform of school choice, charters,
Mm.
all of that, right? And I think my own work, my earlier work, particularly around the charter authorization process, was showing that Black people wanted to open up schools post-Katrina that had the elements of what we might say is good education, right? They wanted schools that were, and these are the things that I think we need more of. They wanted schools that had Black teachers. They wanted schools that were culturally relevant or culturally responsive. They wanted schools that used restorative justice, right? So that they were trying to push against the school to prison pipeline and discipline disparities, right? We know that these things actually work, right? We know that if your child has a Black teacher, there's a higher likelihood that they will do better in school than if they don't. And that goes for all children across the board, right? Since we want to be post-racial. But you know,
you know what, Dr. Henry?
we're gonna.
You know what?
All right.
I get
so
it.
everybody benefits from a Black teacher, but you know, the removal of Black teachers is so cynical, right? Because it is part of that reform narrative. We see it in Brown. We see it following Hurricane Katrina with the displacement and removal of almost 7,500 teachers. So like this idea of the Black teacher and what the Black teacher brings or poses is so critical to the work that we need to do and having, right, this site, right, to be able to have this ability to see the world anew, to create otherwise that may not yet exist, but that is ultimately pushing us to move towards that. And so I think, you know, in terms of the reforms, and these aren't large scale reforms, and we see districts implementing them. We see people doing recruitment and retainment, right? Because don't bring me into a burning house and then not give me a hose, right? So like, because that's also what happens, right? So we need to make sure that we are recruiting and retaining. And also I want to add this, and this might, you know, step on a few feet here, toes, but I also want to say that we have to be very careful in who is recruited and what sensibilities they have. What I don't need is a teacher who's telling Blair, you don't need history, right? What I don't need is a Black teacher, right, that is kind of a ventriloquist or is a puppet for a ventriloquist of white supremacy, right? So we don't need that. We need teachers that have culturally relevant teaching and experience. We need teachers who understand the history. And we also know that we need to create sites, school sites that are worthy of our children. Those are things that actually, some of the stuff that we're talking about, we know the answers to. The lack of will and failure of nerve is, I think, part of the challenge. But I mean, I think we can think about all of these things historically, presently, but ultimately the through line is that it challenges white supremacy and it's unashamed in doing that.
You know,
wait, one more before you jump. I'm not going to ask them something. I just want to ask the audience. We will be taking questions from the audience very soon.
Feel free.
So go ahead and put them in the box in the chat and what have you, and we'll be able to get to
participate in the conversation.
Feel free and now.
So what's been resonating with me, actually, with what you just said, Dr. Henry, as we've been having this conversation, our focus has actually predominantly been on the young, the youth, the students and the learners. But I'm curious about the vision, the sight of the adults, the people who are rearing those students, and thinking about the 15% of Black men who did not vote for for Kamala Harris to become the president, right? And so I'm thinking about, how do we engage or find new, I don't know if it's create a new vision for some of the older people who may be have been historically disenfranchised and are now completely cynical and disengaged.
So that's, history shows us that those Black men have always existed. All right. I mean, you look at the feminist movement, right? Black feminist movement, and Black women have been saying, wait a minute, y'all, we here, right? Like your move towards civil rights, your desire to be incorporated into the franchise of the United States, you doing something here that's kind of suspect, right? Like you're doing something. So like, this moment, like I want to say that, yeah, there's something unique about this moment, but also when we think about the history of, Black folks, everybody ain't always been no kumbaya. Okay. Like, let's be clear. Part of the challenge of segregation that you just have to live next to somebody that you didn't like. And some of those people we might not actually like. But I'm thinking I'm being cute to be acute of the fact that there is a longer lineage of that type of diversity, shall we say.
Oh,
Black people are not monolithic. So
Black people ain't monolithic. Yeah, right. So there's that. But I also think that there are some material concerns that we do have to address. But I don't want us to miss the fact that there is patriarchy, that there's heteropatriarchy, that some folks are just straight up transphobic and trans antagonistic. And we just got to call that out for what it is, right? Like, yes, we all broke. If we all got problems, right? So like, it's not as if it's somehow disconnected. I think the question is, to your question of how we bring folks in, how we call folks to the table, is part of the real intramural conversation that we have to have as Black people. I think about Fannie Lou Hamer, who's one of my favorite civil rights icons. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm married to a 6'2" man that's 250 pounds. And I don't want a liberation without him. Right. And so I think there is a way that we have to be very, I think we have to call people in a loving manner, to call them higher. And I think we also have to address the very material realities that people have: joblessness, homelessness, right, housing instability. All of those things are meaningful and real. And also, I think there's a longer lineage here of people who perhaps refuse even engage in this. And let's be clear, Harriet Tubman carried a gun.
Did.
And she was like, there were some people who didn't want to, who wanted to go back. So like, let's just keep it all. I think someone in the comments says all kinfolk and kinfolk, right? Like, this is the challenge we have.
Yeah. Dr. Royal, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, but I want to be careful how I say it. As a child of the 90s, I'll say 80s and 90s, I think about how Donald Trump was glorified in our music and in our culture, right? Let's take it back to the 80s as a child, watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, right? I was watching an old episode of Sex and the City, and Donald Trump had a cameo on there. And so, the mythicism that's involved with him and the desire to have that sort of opulence isn't lost on me, especially because we have to remember that we're engaged in this American project.
Oh, there it is.
It asks us to forget who we are, who our community is, to take on something that is very laden with, I got mine, you mind if you get yours or not, and I'm going to be sort of at the top. So I think it's very important that, to the extent we can, because sometimes I think, I'm glad Dr. Henry brought up Harriet Tubman, because she was very clear that everybody can't go. Everybody is welcome, but we're to act like they are going to be a liability, they can't go. To the extent we can engage people around those things, I think it's essential. Think about June Jordan. When June Jordan wrote about Mike Tyson right after he was convicted of rape, she was comparing him to the character Bigger Thomas. And she said, I never thought Bigger Thomas was okay. I never thought he should escape back into my body's community, but I did and do think he is my brother. Right. And so when I remember that at the forefront, then it reminds me to try to engage with those people who I see as in my community, who still don't necessarily agree with some, I can't really understand why you would want such, such a misogynistic, capitalistic, all of this sort of stuff. And to the extent that we can, I think that it makes sense to engage, with our family and to have family conversations, but also it requires discernment to know when we've gotten to the point that everybody can't go.
Woo.
That's a word.
And to that point, we have a question that came in asking, in light that we know that those types of, and not just men, I mean, there were 8% of Black women. Yeah. So it's 3 of y'all that we need to talk to. But how do we teach the youth? Again, like you said, Kamika, the future is always where the answer is. Yeah. So how do those of us make sure we teach the youth to critically read the messages they receive so that they won't vote against their best interests?
I want to push on us a little bit, though, because whatever the percentage was that voted for Donald Trump, I promise that there's going to be at least 50% that voted for Kamala that I still don't trust.
Woo! Come on, keep talking.
So when we're talking about our own best interests, we have to consider that sort of in phases, right? Yes. We have to. One of the things that was important to me, did I cast a vote for Kamala? I did, probably because I decided to vote for Angela Brooks because I can't stand Larry Hogan. I have to tell you that if Kamala was running the same with Angela Brooks against Larry Hogan, I can't promise I would have gone, because for me, the things that I value are free Palestine, one of the primary ones, right? That was keeping me out of giving her my support, but I was there. I knew Maryland was going to go blue either way, but I'm like, well, I'm voting for Angela Brooks. I'm gonna go ahead and cast this vote. But I made no sort of mistakes about. I had no illusions about who Kamala is, what she's invested in, and what she isn't. I just knew that she was the better option than what we have right now, right? And I think that we have to help young people when they've passed sort of that. You believe you're looking at these concrete stages. When you start to move beyond that, when our young people are moving beyond that, we have to engage them and think that is not dichotomous. Mm-hmm. The world is not just good and bad. The world has multiple shades and it's very complex. And we have to ask them to start looking at what are their interests, and not just their self-interest. What are the interests of their community? What are the interests of the people they want to be in community and solidarity with? And how do we get those things both in the short term and in the long run?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dr. Henry?
I mean, what can I say after that? I mean, I think that's kind of hard. I mean, that's it. That's the mic drop, right? I think Dr. Royal's point, I don't need to emphasize it, but I mean, how do we help students see what their interests are collectively, right? And I think we are very heavy on the American, but light on the African. So like the traditions from which we come, right? The notions of community, right? I always tell my students, the whole Enlightenment era with white and philosophy starts with Rene Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am.
Oh,
but our tradition is
because we are. Come on,
right?
Dr. Henry, as Kamika was talking, it brought me back to a philosophy class that I took in college, where I had to really, because we were being taught philosophy from a completely Western philosophy perspective, completely ignoring, and that was, they were teaching, I think, therefore I am, instead of, and not even acknowledging that there is an I am because we are.
Yes.
And even acknowledging that is an entire different way of looking at the world and looking at your place in the world, and how you connect to the world and how the world connects to you. Oh, yes, continue. I'm sorry.
No, that is it.
Yeah.
Right. That is so central. The project of the United States is to dislocate us from that idea. Right. Everything that we've done in terms of movement building, in terms of surviving, is because of community. It's because of being in right relationship with each other and the earth and the world that we're in, right? And so like this idea that it's all about me, take your eyes off yourself for a moment. And I think that's what we have to do, that kind of that reworking of what the American kind of project is, which is to say, that we don't need to be critical. You just take whatever's given and, you know, act as if this is not happening to the people that you love, right? Right. The people that you purportedly care about. So what does that mean? Right. And I think it's interesting because just in general, like sometimes I've been to other countries and I see the way that people are in vociferous debate with each other on the street about stuff. And what we say, well, we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion, right? Like we actually have to be in community and in communication with each other, right? And so that's part of the challenge is that we, you know, I think I saw in the chats someone saying that people could read, but don't have the critical thinking. I mean, I think that is the goal. I could pronounce it. I have the phonetic awareness of a word, but them words ain't being made flesh, and them words aren't materializing or making sense in a way that is connected to a larger project, a larger purpose beyond some limited kind of individual project or individual scheme.
We're going to take this one more question from the audience before we wrap up for the night. Access. How do we teach young people to gain access? I'm curious to know access to what.
And that's what I was about to ask. What does that look like?
Because there are certain things that I think people want access to that aren't going to serve them well. But I want to hear the good doctor's responses to this question about access.
It looks like that question came from my good friend, my sorrow, Dr. Kenethia. You know, I don't necessarily think about access. I think it's an interesting question. I think when I think about it, though, what I think about is them gaining access to themselves. How do we get them access to themselves, to their history, to their lineage, to their community, to something that is bigger than them and grander than them, that is just about self, right? So when you think about I am because we are, you think about I think therefore I am, we have to give young people an opportunity to sort of decide who they are and how they want to be. But to have them make that decision situated in a community, right? We have to give them opportunity to practice asking hard questions and practice pushing back, right? I think once we give that access to being self-possessed, to have them have the knowledge and the belief that I actually deserve something better, we deserve more than what's being given to us. That's how you get them on a path to pursue access, not to me, not just for themselves, but for us, right? For our community, for those who are around us. And if we're going to make it through this administration, all we have is each other, quite honestly. All we have is each other and what we're going to do for each other and with each other, as opposed to each other.
Dr. Henry, you want to speak on access?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add, I love your point, Dr. Royal, access to themselves, right? I think that's really beautiful because I think so often is that we don't know ourselves, right? We're still we're kind of having, what we're having is an identity crisis in some ways. I would say some of the 15% or whatever the percentage was, right, that wants to kind of, I don't know if you all saw recently the stuff of the Black History Month thing at the White House, right? Like that, you know, there's an identity crisis going on, right? And I do think that knowing oneself is, you know, central to this and knowing where one comes from. And what I would say also regarding access is if we build it, they will come, right? So I think part of the challenge is, you know, I think to your earlier question, Blair, about like access to what? I think this is access to what? Like, what are we talking about? What do we want? I mean, do we really want them to have access to schooling, right? In some of these places, right? Like, actually might not need to be in that place, right? So we might need to think about what do we need to create? And I think that's one of the things I love about Binola is like it's creating a space so that people will have access to this. So I think part of the project moving forward, if we learn anything from our ancestors, is to create these alternative spaces, these institutions, whether they're formalized or informal, right? To provide young people with the space and to provide adults, right? NOLA is primarily working with teachers in New Orleans, right? So to provide everybody with space to, you know, in our fancy technical words and in the academy, counter hegemonic knowledge, right? Like, you know, all that.
Let them know.
No. That's it.
How do we create those spaces? And I think, you know, New Orleans has a wonderful example with Rethink NOLA. So if you in New Orleans watching, take a look at Rethink NOLA. This was a space that was created for young people, right? This is out of school. This is not, you know, Mrs. and Mrs. Smith's chemistry class and Mr. Jim's, I don't know, history class. This was a space that was out of school where young people were able to engage all the things that we want them to know, right? The history, the politics, the culture. So we need more of those types of spaces, right? We used to do that a lot, right? As Black people, whether it was at your church, whether it was in some alternative, you know, alternative group, but we have to kind of create those spaces because clearly the federal government ain't gonna do it, and they certainly don't want to fund it. So, you know, some of the work that in some ways, when we think about the history of Black education, that has always been our project, which is to create spaces. People was creating spaces in slave auction houses.
Yep,
that's
right. To educate in the cellars, in you know, in the basements of churches. So we have to create. We have to give back. You know, we need to have a Sankofa perspective in a way where we go back and retrieve all the good that there is. And I think we got caught slipping in a way because we have. I'm not going to say we. I want to be careful. There are people doing really good works. I don't want to totalize it, but I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think this moment has taught us how important it is to continue to build and build and build, both in season and out of season.
Listen, go ahead.
That's a word.
Dr. Royal and Dr. Henry, thank you both so much for being not only the warrior giants that you are facing who knows what manner of challenge in the world of academia, being hegemonic.
You be counter hetero too.
This is fair. I'm very counter hetero. But that's
not
my
me.
Life. That's my personal life. That's my life. That's me speaking. This is my story, my song. That's all I'm saying. This is my story and my song. But we are grateful for your brilliance, for your insight, for your courage in the midst and despite all that is around and challenging both of you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight. Thank you for taking all of my many phone calls and text messages leading up to this. We appreciate it so much. Dr. Royal, what would you like to leave with the people tonight?
Find a squad. Like find some people who you can spend time with thinking through hard things that center us and finding a way forward. Because all we have is ourselves and each other.
Yes. Dr. Henry, what would you like to leave with the people tonight?
Maybe, I mean, I 100% in agreement with what Dr. Royal said. I'll end where I started. There are Black people in the future. And their future is not determined or totally constrained by white supremacy, white dominance, or white anything.
That's right.
Right. So don't, you know, I'll end also with a little scripture. Don't get weary in well doing.
Due season
work. All right. Continue to do the work, continue to fight, because there is a future where your children are there, your children's children are there. When people talk about I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams, what does that really mean? That means that they saw you in the future. That the future existed. for you beyond their current circumstances.
Yes.
I don't want us to lose that in this mist, because the days can get lonely and the nights can get dark. But
if we faint not, is what I heard you say.
Okay.
If we faint not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Thank you both so much. Y'all don't go anywhere. Everybody, we will be back
at the end of March.
At the end of March, the last Wednesday in March, 6 p.m. Central.
You can register on.
Please stay tuned for the speakers for that series. For that episode, stay tuned for the Eventbrite link. If you are not following BNOLA's Eventbrite page, please make sure you follow the BNOLA Eventbrite page, which will allow you to get the notifications for each of these as they are coming, and the reminders and all of those things.
You can already add all of the events now for the speaker series
to your calendar.
Y'all.
Thank you so much to our speakers tonight. Thank you to Dren and to Stevie, the fearless leaders of Black New Orleans, Black Education from New Orleans. We are grateful for their leadership and for their brilliance and for their courage. Please make sure you go to the BNOLA website and look at all of the things. Please make sure you go and look at the digital syllabus that is informing these conversations and the themes from the digital syllabus that are informing these conversations. Once again, I am Blair Haley.
I'm Brandon Haley.
And we are grateful for your time, energy, and love tonight. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.